This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What happened today didn't rupture the system. It exposed it quietly, procedurally, in plain view. An institution followed its own rules, and suddenly the rules themselves became the story. Not because they were new, but because they were never built for this moment, for this scale, for this kind of collision. You're told to look for drama, for outrage, for sides. But the real signal is colder than that. It's structural. A system designed for ordinary defendants is now being stress tested by something it never anticipated. And instead of adapting, it's improvising, case by case, warning by warning, removal by removal. That should make you pause. If you stay with me, you'll see why this moment isn't loud. It's dangerous. And why what comes next doesn't depend on personalities at all. Because once the system reveals its limits, it doesn't get to hide them again. Something else is happening underneath the surface. And it's easy to miss because we're trained to look at people instead of systems. What actually controls this moment is not a judge, not a defendant, not even the law itself. It's procedure, rules written for predictability, timelines designed for routine cases, powers meant to handle disruption at the margins, not at the center. Those rules are now doing something unintended. They are forcing decisions without precedent. And once that happens, discretion becomes destiny. Every warning, every instruction, every enforcement choice, none of them are neutral anymore. The system can't pause. It can't wait for clarity. It has to keep moving forward, even when forward isn't mapped. That's the shift. Control hasn't been seized. It's been inherited by process. And process doesn't ask whether the consequences are sustainable. It only asks what the next step allows. And that's where the tension starts to build. Because when a system runs on rules alone, it keeps going right up until something breaks. And we're not at the breaking point yet. This didn't start today. It didn't even start this year. The most dangerous changes never announce themselves. They arrive quietly. They normalize. There was a time when the idea of this moment would have stopped everything. Delayed proceedings, triggered emergency rules, forced a redesign of the system itself. Instead, it was absorbed before. Extraordinary cases were treated as exceptions. Now, they are processed. Calendars fill. Motions are filed. Warnings are issued. What changed wasn't the law. It was the tempo, slow adjustments, incremental allowances, each one defensible on its own. That's how systems drift. Not by collapse, by accommodation. And once accommodation becomes habit, reversal becomes impossible. Because now, every new step relies on the last one having been accepted, and questioning the process feels more disruptive than continuing it. That's the silent shift. The system didn't fail loudly. It adapted quietly. And adaptation under pressure can be more dangerous than resistance because it carries you forward before you realize where you're going. Then the system flinched, not in theory, not in commentary. In a room with rules, a warning had already been given. Clear, documented. A question was asked, a narrow one. The answer didn't come. Instead, the exchange widened. Authority was challenged, procedure was tested, and then something rare happened. The mechanism designed for last resorts was activated. Not as symbolism, as function, federal marshals stepped forward. The proceeding did not stop. The chair was left empty. That moment is already being treated as the story. It isn't. If you're watching for spectacle, you miss the signal. This wasn't escalation by emotion. It was enforcement by rule. And that's precisely why it matters. Because once enforcement crosses that threshold, it establishes something new without ever announcing it. If this analysis is helping you see what's underneath the headlines, stay with me. Because what looks like a single decision is actually a door. And once it opens, it doesn't close cleanly. Here's the part that doesn't get said out loud. The system didn't choose a side, it chose continuity. When disruption appears, the priority isn't justice or optics, it's momentum. Proceedings must continue, calendars must hold, authority must be enforced. That's how the mechanism works. Those with institutional insulation absorb almost nothing. They have teams, time, platforms. The pressure doesn't rise there. It moves outward, into precedent, into expectation, into everyone who comes next. Because once the system proves it can proceed without full participation, absence becomes acceptable. And once absence is acceptable, presence becomes conditional. That's the quiet redistribution of risk. The court maintains order, the process survives, but the cost is deferred. Not to this case, to the framework. And frameworks don't break immediately. They stretch. What benefits the system in the short term can destabilize it in the long one. Because every mechanism built to absorb shock eventually becomes a pathway for it. And the next moment won't arrive under the same conditions. Now the pace changes. Shorter timelines, tighter margins. What was rare becomes usable. What was unthinkable becomes available. Proceedings continue without pause. Without reset, every decision now carries velocity. Warnings don't cool things down. They compress them. Options narrow. Responses harden. There's no space left for ambiguity. Only compliance or consequence. And once the system learns it can move this way, it doesn't forget. The room adjusts. The players adjust. The expectations adjust. This is how escalation works without shouting. Not through confrontation, through repetition, each step justified by the last. Each action framed as necessary, until necessity becomes routine and routine becomes policy. This is no longer about control. It's about inertia. And inertia doesn't care where it's going, only that it keeps moving. That's the acceleration. And it doesn't slow down on its own. This is where it reaches you. Not as theory, not as precedent, as experience. Because when systems normalize removal, absence, procedural override, they don't stay confined to historic cases. They migrate. You see it when process matters more than explanation. When compliance replaces consent. When being heard becomes conditional. You feel it in institutions that move faster than your ability to respond. In decisions that happen to you, not with you, you are told this is efficiency, stability, order. But what it actually feels like is distance. A system that no longer slows down for legitimacy, only for rules. If this analysis is resonating, if it's clarifying something you couldn't quite name before, stay with me, subscribe, because this isn't ending here. What you're watching is not power being exercised, it's power being routinized. And once that happens, the line between exception and expectation disappears. That's not abstract. That's structural. And it doesn't stop at the courtroom door. This doesn't stay contained. Systems watch each other. They learn, they borrow. What happens inside one courtroom becomes a reference point elsewhere. Quietly, informally, without announcement, other institutions take note, not of the politics, of the mechanics. What worked? What didn't stop the process? What allowed continuity under stress? That's how spillover happens. Not through coordination, through imitation. Once a system proves it can enforce procedure at this level, others recalibrate their thresholds. What once felt extraordinary now feels usable. And that matters beyond borders. Because legal systems, financial systems, political systems, they're linked by confidence. Confidence that rules are stable, that processes are predictable. That power is bounded when that confidence wavers, reactions cascade. Markets hedge, allies hesitate, institutions harden. No one says it out loud. They don't have to. This is no longer local. It's systemic, and systems under uncertainty don't de-escalate. They brace What comes next won't announce itself as a crisis. It will arrive as adjustment, and adjustment is where real instability begins. From here, the system has three paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Rules bend. Procedures adapt. New norms quietly form around extraordinary cases. The system survives by redefining what normal means. Stability is preserved, but at a lower threshold than before. The second path is erosion, not collapse, where each exception weakens confidence. Each workaround costs legitimacy. Institutions keep functioning, but trust thins out. People comply, but they no longer believe the process protects them. The system still moves, but it feels hollow. The third path is rupture, a moment when the accumulated strain exceeds tolerance, not because of one decision, because of all of them together. A rule enforced here, a shortcut taken there. Until the system faces a test, it can't proceduralize.